again, everybody. Welcome to episode 51 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. Now, we were up last night watching England win and clean sweep the final T20 against New Zealand. So they clean swept the series 3-0. But we are a little bit more awake than last week, aren't we, Sid? Hopefully. Well, you'll have to wait and see across the next few minutes of Vodcast. I certainly feel more awake. Anyway, Sid, would you like to start off by explaining today's backdrop, please?
I was just really impressed with Fran Wilson today. So we've got Fran Wilson as Sergeant Wilson from Dad's Army as our backdrop. I posted that on Twitter as well. And Fran Wilson today, she came in, England had still 8 overs left, and she made 30-yard runs off 25 balls, something like that. And it was just a really solid performance, and it was the kind of thing that, the kind of unshowy solid performance. It's not like, a standout thing. She didn't even get player of the match for it. But a really crucial performance for England, and very much, I felt, the reason why England were in a position where they had something to bowl at. Catherine Brunt could come out and be aggressive and get her 2 wickets, which got her the player of the match award for her 2 wickets in that 1 over. And really gave England that platform. But it was all down to Wilson, I think. Raf, what about the other 2 T20s that we've been watching this week? What did you make of them?
Yeah, I thought, obviously, generally, very clinical performances from England. Got the job done pretty easily on all 3 occasions, didn't they? Obviously, Tammy Beaumont had a good series. I believe she was player of the series in the end, and is experiencing some good consistency now in T20s. In the same way that she has been in ODIs, after that kind of still think slightly strange failed experiment with moving her down the order during the World T20. I think that she's shown that was a bit silly, and made that look like a bit of a stupid move. So I think she's pretty much cemented her opening spot there, so that's good for England. It was obviously also good to see some of the players with a bit less experience getting some game time and really making their marks. So I'm particularly thinking about Freya Davies, who I wrote a piece about after the second T20, who was player of the match, picked up her first 4 for in international cricket, and I think really kind of took advantage of the absence of Catherine Brunt to kind of hold her hand up and say, I'm a really important strike bowler for England, and very effective. So that was really exciting. And we did finally, in the third T20, see Sophia Dunkley actually getting a proper opportunity, not just to stand at the non-strikers end, but to actually kind of trouble the scorers. And she was promoted to bat at 4, wasn't she? Which I think is the highest that she's ever batted for England. Mm-hmm. So that was great to see, because obviously we've been calling for that for a long time. And yes, there was a little bit of an incident with her perhaps at fault in the Nat Siver run out early on. And I don't think that Dunkley will look back on that as her, her favourite innings of all time. It was, it was a bit frantic. She didn't look hugely comfortable. But she got 25, I think it was. And I think actually that, I don't know whether it was conscious on Nat Siver's part, but she could have sent Dunkley back, and she didn't. She chose to take the slightly suicidal run herself, and was run out. But actually, in terms of England's player development, that was important, because Nat Siver has had many opportunities this tour and on other occasions, and Sophia Dunkley hasn't. So in a way, that kind of bit of unselfishness, I think, was speaks well of Siver as somebody who understands that. I don't know whether in that split second she would have been conscious of that, but certainly in retrospect, I think it was the right move for England. I guess we can say that now because they won the match. So yeah, but it's been a little bit disappointing from New Zealand's perspective, hasn't it, Sid? Obviously they did win that 1 ODI, but then they have lost all 3 T20s, and it's a difficult time for them as a side. They've obviously got a home World Cup rapidly approaching. 12 months will go by quite quickly, I think. Yeah. Not necessarily going to be a huge amount of international cricket between now and then. What can they do to make sure that they aren't embarrassed in a home World Cup?
Yeah, it's difficult for them, isn't it? I think that one of the keys to it is they're so dependent on Sophie Devine. And she did have one good score in the ODI series reasonably recently against Australia. She had a fantastic WBBL, so she
Yeah.
hasn't lost it as a player, but she's had a run of poor scores. She hasn't made a decent score in an international T20 for over a year now. And that's no different to Danny Wyatt. Danny Wyatt, has also had a poor run of form, but England have been able to carry that because they've got so many other players that can come in. So, Tammy Beaumont can do it, and Amy Jones and Fran Wilson today. Whereas for New Zealand, they're very dependent upon her, and if she doesn't come good, it's all down to Satterthwaite. But Satterthwaite can't do it every time either. She did it once in the ODI series this time. She was unable to do that again today. And unless Sophie Devine's firing though, they really are in trouble, unfortunately.
So she's it's almost like a talismanic effect. If she is doing well and having a good run of form for New Zealand, then that inspires the rest of the team, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I thought there were a few positives for New Zealand overall from the tour. I think I kind of wrote about a couple of these at the end of the ODIs. I was impressed with Brooke Halliday overall. She did look good actually in today's T20, although obviously didn't hang around quite long enough to make the decisive impact that she could have done. But I think discovering a player like that in her mid-20s who's never played for New Zealand before, we'd never heard of her, had we?
Yeah.
Having not followed New Zealand domestic cricket closely enough. And that's actually quite exciting for New Zealand to find somebody like that who really did look quite at home in international cricket. So that's really positive for them, I think, going forward. And I guess I think Amelia Kerr's been quite impressive as well. Obviously got out in a bit of a stupid way today, a little bit of an irresponsible way.
There's a little bit of a pattern, isn't it?
But she did have that really important innings in the third ODI, I think it was, batting with Amy Satterthwaite and kind of showing what she can do with the bat, and hasn't really, since that big performance against Ireland, she hadn't really made a decisive impact with the bat. So it was important to show that she could do that against a top team like England, and obviously as well showing, particularly today in the field, that she's really dynamic. There were a couple of times when she saved fours that with somebody else on the boundary would have certainly gone over the rope, I think. And yes, she dropped an absolute dolly catch, but she took a couple of other brilliant catches. And then that's not even mentioning kind of her main thing, which is her bowling. So she's picked up wickets consistently, and is definitely showing that she's still totally bamboozling really top class England batters. So good series for Amelia Kerr overall, I think, as well.
Yep.
Okay, so that's England v New Zealand, but there was a bit of news this week that potentially pertains to the forthcoming Cricket World Cup in New Zealand in a year's time, which was about the Women's Rugby World Cup being postponed, Sid.
Yeah, so the Women's Rugby World Cup, which was due to take place in New Zealand this autumn, or this spring if you're in New Zealand, so October time, that's been postponed for a year due to COVID.
Right.
And that's obviously got to be a bit of a concern for the Cricket World Cup. There are differences, which we'll come to in a minute, but the Cricket World Cup's only supposed to take place less than 6 months later after this postponed Women's Rugby World Cup. And it does make you wonder whether we're trying to go too early for this, whether the cricket world is doing a bit of a Boris Johnson and dashing in early, going COVID, that's all finished, we've sorted with that. But you can never tell with COVID, and so there's got to be a concern there. Now it's not the same. There were going to be a lot more people involved in the Women's Rugby World Cup, so quarantine was much more of an issue. And it may well turn out that 6 months is a huge amount of time in the sort of COVID timeline, because of course the impact that the vaccine can have. You would imagine there will be a requirement for all of the players and all of the people that are covering the Women's Cricket World Cup to be vaccinated by that point, which is not something that's probably realistic in October, but something that will be realistic by next March. Certainly everyone in this country will hope to have been vaccinated by then. And I think that's something that they can make happen. And with less people involved, it's still doable, but it's got to be a little bit of a concern, yes. So we'll keep you posted on that one.
Okay.
Now they're calling it Clapgate. It's the first.
Are they?
They are. It's the first English women's cricket scandal to achieve the official gate suffix since Beckenham Gate all those years ago. Um, we are, of course, referring to the Alex Hartley incident, which is over a week ago now, Raf. But it's still causing ructions and ramifications. And Raf, you have opinions.
I do, which people who follow me on Twitter will be aware of, because I may have sent some angry tweets over the last few days, shall we say. It's obviously not the headlines that anyone wanted around this series, least of all Alex Hartley. Well, perhaps even more least of all the ECB, to be honest. And I think they've come out of this really badly, actually. The idea that they've kind of made a somehow false equivalence between the behaviour of the men's players in tweeting and liking those tweets, those anti-Hartley tweets, encouraging a social media pile-on, and they've made that equivalent to Alex Hartley tweeting what was a very light-hearted tweet, not intended in the way that people seem to have interpreted it. It's just crazy, and I really think they've got this one wrong, and I would actually really like to see them acknowledge that publicly, that they have got this one wrong. I was so pleased to see Alex Hartley doing some interviews about this with the Telegraph and the Guardian, saying, no, I'm not prepared to accept that I was wrong about this, and I'm not prepared to accept that the ECB emailing me to tell me I was wrong about it is the end of the matter. The ECB obviously, their intention was for her to, basically apologise and say, oh yeah, I was wrong, and sorry about that, and I won't do anything like this again, and just kind of meekly accept it and then be quiet about it. But she hasn't done that, and I think that's absolutely right, because really we want to send out a clear signal that the behaviour of those men's cricketers is not acceptable. I'm completely with Izzy Westbury on this, who has been quite vocal about the fact, I think she was on the Sky Sports Cricket podcast, saying that actually, the England men's and the England women's players don't have a good relationship, or really indeed any relationship at the moment. They very rarely encounter each other, and is that really good enough, especially compared with the situation that pertains in Australia, who've obviously got that benefit of Lissa Healy and Mitchell Starc being married to each other, but there just seems to be that kind of mutual respect and support that is so lacking here. And I do think that it's, as Izzy Westbury said, it's reflective of a deeper cultural issue in cricket in this country, whereby there is this real underlying sense amongst male players that they're kind of subsidising the women. They don't need to respect the women. They don't like the fact that all of this money from the ECB is being poured into developing women's cricket now and paying women's players. They're kind of, there's a bit of a sense of, well, that money should be going to us, and I think that that's disgraceful attitude. But that's what some of those tweets were really alluding to and really revealed as a kind of deeper attitude, and it's really unfortunate. In a way, the ECB is a bit like a really big kind of corporation, where you've got one department over here that's kind of the women's team, and one department over here that's the men's team, and they don't really have anything to do with each other on a day-to-day basis. But one of them, the group over here, the men's players, are really well paid, and the group over here, the women's players are, they're paid minimum wage. So, okay, fine, but they're much less well paid, and therefore this department over here doesn't really seem to think it needs to have any respect for this department over there. Really, really unfortunate. And I think that if I was the ECB, then I'd really be actually sitting down and going, okay, we've got this one wrong. What can we do to make sure that that kind of deeper cultural antipathy of male cricketers towards women cricketers, not all of them, but it does seem to be the most vocal ones on social media, how can we overcome that? How can we educate them and make sure that that doesn't happen again, and that attitude is rooted out of our organisation? That's what they need to be doing, not emailing Alex Hartley saying, mate, you got it wrong. Well, I think the ECB have got it wrong, and it's really disappointing. Okay. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant there, but yes, I have opinions, and I think that this incident is it's deeper than just this one single tweet from Alex Hartley, and the way in which it's handled is important. And so far, it's been handled in a way that reinforces some of these negative attitudes about we shouldn't be funding women's cricket.
Okay.
Now, Sid, moving on to WNCL. That's obviously been progressing over the last couple of weeks. I think it's been since we mentioned it in the Vodcast.
Yeah.
What's been happening? Scores on the doors.
Well, we have our first qualifier for the final. We have Victoria have qualified for the final.
Ooh.
And we can know that because we can look at the table and we can go, Victoria have got X number of points, only one side. New South Wales can still overtake them, but nobody else can. That means that Victoria definitely finish as one of the top two, and they've qualified for the final. So that's all well and good, and you can look at that by just looking at the table. But the difficult bit comes when you want to see what the other qualifiers are doing. What permutations will potentially mean that any other team could qualify. What teams are definitely out of it. And the only way to approach that problem is to use computer software to do it, because there are millions of permutations. So this time yesterday, taking into account all of the possible results and the games left to be played, there were 10 million potential permutations for the outcomes of what could happen and who could qualify and who could not qualify. So I wrote a piece of software and it went through all those permutations yesterday. Yesterday didn't tell us an awful lot, actually. It told us that almost everybody could still qualify and that nobody had definitely qualified. But I ran it again this morning. This morning, 2 less games, it had already come down to only 400,000 permutations. So it's a huge drop, but that's the maths.
Still quite a lot if somebody was doing it with a pencil and paper, though.
Yeah, no, it's the sort of thing that you can only do with a computer, really. And so, Victoria have definitely qualified. Now, the interesting thing is that there's still several other teams that can qualify to join them. Western Australia and ACT are out of it. They can't qualify now, but everybody else can. So stay tuned and look out to see who will be joining Victoria in the WNCL final. And we should be able to watch that on telly, we're hoping, over here. So looking forward to that one.
Can you do something with the software that makes it more likely for Tasmania to qualify?
No, sadly not.
Oh, that's a shame. Don't know if Sally Ann Briggs is watching, but that would be the question she'd be asking. Great, well done, Sid. You're a very clever person to have invented that software.
I try.
And finally, news just coming in just before we sat down to record this podcast that South Africa have absolutely walloped India in the first ODI of that series. So Exhibit A of what happens when you, rest your some of your leading players, say rest in inverted commas, /drop, and also don't play any international cricket for a year, I guess. That's the moral of that story. So we'll keep following that series and see how that unfolds. And brilliant to have the riches of multiple international matches going on in one day, isn't it, Sid?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thanks for watching and see you next week. Stay safe and well.
Bye.